For the last several weeks, we have been talking about the kind of ministry that we want to build as a congregation. We've said, before that, weeks of study on Christ's vision for his church and lots of different things like that. We've said that our ministry needs to be gospel-centered. It needs to be about the good news about Jesus. Not about so many of the things that so many in our society want it to be about. We said that our ministry needs to be discipleship focused. We're not just making converts. We're not just racking up numbers on the scoreboard. We're certainly not simply trying to build attendance numbers and budget numbers. Those things are good, but we're about making disciples for Jesus. And then we said that our ministry should lead both ourselves and our people, our community, to maturity, to a fully orbed maturity. And that actually leads us right into today's message. What we want to learn today is that our ministry needs to be to the whole person. We want to minister to body, heart, mind, soul. All of us. Now, of course, part of that is simply because of the nature of Christian maturity. We've been talking about that for a few weeks now. But we see it modeled here in our text. And that's what we want to turn our attention to now. So what is it that was wrong with this man? This man that met Jesus as he got out of the boat. What was it that afflicted him? You might be thinking, well, duh, that's obvious. He was demon-possessed. Yes. And we don't want to lose sight of that. But I want you to look beyond simply his demon possession. Because Mark gives us a number of clues in this text about the struggles that this man faced. The first, of course, was insanity. And, if you had several voices inhabiting your head, it would fracture your mind too, right? And these weren't just any voices. They were evil voices. Demonic voices. Secondly, this man was afflicted with impurity. Now, this is an aspect of ancient culture that's hard for us to understand. But notice how the possessing agent is first described in Mark 5 there. A man with an impure spirit, the NIV says, or some of your translation may say an unclean spirit. Same thing. Okay? Eventually, we learn that these are not just any old garden variety unclean spirits. They are demons. But the first way that Mark identifies them is they are unclean, impure spirits. But that's not the only way that we know that this man is ritually impure. He lives in a graveyard full of impurity. He lives apparently without clothes. We get that explicitly in Luke's version of this story, but Mark implies it down close to the end. And What was the point of impurity? Well, the third thing on our list, isolation. This man lived isolated from society and from God. And it doesn't matter whether he was Jewish or Gentile. We actually think this man was probably a Gentile. This is a Gentile-predominated area, as is witnessed by the herd of pigs feeding on the hillside. But either way, it doesn't matter. Because whether you were Jewish or Gentile, impurity separates you. It isolates you from your family, from your friends, from your community, and from any source of divine help that might be available to you. All of these things are terrible. The one that I resonate right now with is isolation. Anyone facing a chronic, life-threatening illness, or anyone who is a caregiver for such a person, knows that isolation, this feeling that no one knows, that no one cares. Indeed, the world goes on without you. They still are having Cowboys training camp out in Oxnard. Texas Rangers are still playing over in Arlington, though some would say they're not sure why. Politics goes on as usual. Wars and famines and other heartbreaks go on as usual. And it leaves you feeling terribly, terribly alone. But for people in Jesus' day, that sense of impurity, that sense that there is something deeply wrong with you, something so wrong that nobody wants anything to do with you, that was crushing. It was crushing. And they didn't have psychiatric medications in the ancient world. Insanity was its own cruel life sentence. So what does Jesus do for this man? What does he do for him? Well, the first thing that Jesus does is rather obvious. He sets this man free from demonic oppression. And that alone is worth the encounter. That alone, for this man, is worth having met Jesus. But this one act becomes the seedbed for so many other acts. Jesus makes it possible for this man to put the broken pieces of his mind back together again. Truth is, Jesus does it for him. Jesus protects this man from future physical harm. Did you notice what the man was doing as an expression of his insanity? He's running around cutting himself with stones. Can you say infection? Around a herd of pigs? Golly. He's harming himself. And That's one of those chief manifestations of insanity, is that we harm ourselves because we cannot stand to live in our own mind and in our own body anymore. Jesus provides this man with a way to be reintegrated into his society. Somebody comes up with some clothes, throws some clothes on this guy. He's sitting there in his right mind. Now he can be a functional member of society. All of the vestiges of impurity are gone. That also means he can relate to God again. Now, it's not surprising, if you look down there at verses 18 through 20, we didn't read them, but they're also part of this story. It's not surprising that this guy wanted to go with Jesus. That's what I would have done. I don't know if I would have given Jesus an option about it. He'd have been looking around and go, where is that guy? And I'd be already in the boat. Because I don't want to do that again. And if this guy can free me from these things, then I want to go with him. I want to be with him. But Jesus does something that is both humanizing and hard. He gives this man a vocation. He gives him a job to do. He tells the man, no, you can't come with me. Go back to your own people and tell them what the Lord has done for you. Now, that's Jewish talk for tell them what God, the God of Israel, has done for you. But the man rightly interprets what Jesus really means. And he goes and tells them what Jesus did for him. He may not know anything about Israel's God, but he knows this Jesus fellow. And what Jesus does is he gives this man a reason to live. That's what we need so often, is we need a reason to live. We need a reason to keep going. Because this world is harsh. It is cruel. It is evil. And we need something that gives us the strength to carry on. Now, this was perfectly in keeping with how Jesus saw his own ministry. How do we know that? Well, there's a story in Mark 6 that illustrates this. It's right after this, our event. But the problem is, Mark doesn't give us very many details. Luke does. So in Luke chapter 4, we find this really interesting text where Jesus goes to his home synagogue. And he reads this text. Actually, what he does is he reads a couple of verses out of Isaiah 61, and then he reads a verse out of Isaiah 58. These verses talk about setting free the captive, healing the blind, rescuing the oppressed. All this stuff that Jesus has been doing. And the interesting thing is, some of this language sounds highly political, and yet Jesus is, if you think in terms of what we typically think about politically, Jesus is as unpolitical as any figure in history. So how does he do it? He does it with his life. He does it with his death. He does it with his resurrection. He does it with his church. He does it with us, putting our arms around people, loving them, healing. No, I can't touch anyone and heal them. I can't even drive out demons. Not in my own strength, anyway. So how do we know that this is even supposed to be part of our vocation? Well, let's turn to another interesting text. Ezekiel 34, verses 2 through 4. Do you notice how God chastises what he calls the shepherds of Israel? And he's probably referring to Israel's ruling class. Possibly its priests and its Levites as well. Those who have power, those who have the ability to do something good. These people do have political power. They are supposed to act politically. How does he speak to them? He chastises them. Why? Because they haven't done all these things that Jesus did. They haven't bound up the broken. They haven't strengthened the weak. They haven't liberated the oppressed. They haven't healed the sick. This is who we are as followers of Jesus. We're the ones out there living the life of Jesus for him. When Paul calls us the body of Christ, he means it. And it's interesting. When I was younger, and even in my earlier middle age, I really cared about churches being, community oriented and progressive in their worship and getting out there and really doing evangelism and being, keeping up with the culture and being able to communicate effectively. Those are all good things. They really are. But if there's one thing that this last year of our shared trials has illustrated, it is that a church must first love. It must first live out this practical ministry. This ministry of hands and hearts. When you're taking somebody to the doctor who can't drive, you're doing the work of Jesus. By the way, so are the doctors. When you're taking food to someone who is bereaved or impoverished, you are doing the work of Jesus. When you're praying over the sick, you're doing the work of Jesus. Now, you might be asking, so how does this fit with all the other things we've been talking about? And that's a fair question. Because sometimes people don't understand what we're trying to communicate. They don't understand how the good news about Jesus is connected with the work that we do on behalf our community, on behalf of our brothers and sisters, on behalf of the broken, the lonely, the hurting. And part of our job, of course, is to help them make that connection. But we also need to remember that many people in Jesus' day also didn't get it. And that's okay. We love people, we serve them, we minister to them anyway. And some of them will ask us why. And sometimes we won't even have to be asked. They'll just be an opportunity for us to share. But isn't that the kind of church that we all want to be in anyway? The kind that loves, the kind that when you come in and you say, I need so-and-so, people come out of the woodwork to say, I'll provide that. I'll do that for you. I'll help you. You're not a burden to me. You're a blessing. And I'm going to love you as long as it takes, because that's how Christ has loved me. Let us pray.